My name is Sahnah, and I'm an assistant professor at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. I'm going to kick this off with a setting the stage. What does decolonizing mental health even mean? Let's go ahead. And at any point you can't hear me, please let me know. So just a few things to kick us off. We're in a contentious time. It seems like we always are, but especially as an academic, we're being silenced for our viewpoints, and decolonization is inherently a political topic. So I just want to make sure that today we give each other the benefit of the doubt and don't make assumptions, and come with an open mind, which I'm sure we all will. And so the viewpoints of the steering committee members, including myself and all panelists, do not necessarily represent that of their affiliated institutions. And while the committee did their best and proactive and meaningfully including Pacific Islander communities, we acknowledge that we could have done better. We always can do better. And just being really cognizant of the fact that this is an AAPI symposium. And while the conference centers experiences of AAPI youth, families, clinicians, and researchers, our panels are informed with the understanding that oppression intersects across various communities of colors and social identities. And by centering race, we are, of course, unintentionally excluding other important identities. And so please speak up and share your perspective and experiences so that you can help fill this gap today. Land acknowledgement. The members of the steering committee and their affiliated institutions are situated on the homeland of Lenape. We are New York City based. I see a lot of folks outside of New York City who have joined, which is amazing. We acknowledge the history of genocide and forced removal that the peoples of the First Nations have experienced. New York City has one of the largest urban Native American and Indigenous populations in this country. We believe that historical awareness of Indigenous exclusion and erasure is critically important. And I would also like to share where I come from, and encourage you all to share about yourselves as well in the chat. I identify as a cisgender, queer, Korean American woman. I was born in the US, but spent my formative years in Korea. I had to do ESL classes when I came back. I spoke no English when I came back when I was 12. A big part of my identity now is that I'm constantly navigating being a single parent to a beautiful multiracial son. I have a PhD, I am East Asian, and I am light-skinned. So those are a few of my privileges that I want to share. And in terms of my mental health, I've been recently diagnosed with complex PTSD, but I am so fortunate to have a Korean mental health counselor who I trust dearly. So this is the lens from which I operate and give this brief talk today. So history matters. My dad is a history professor, so I might be a little biased, but history definitely matters. This is a colonial map of the Asian continent. And so the different colors kind of depict the different colonial powers. And so obviously the major colonial powers were European, but there is also colonialism across and within Asian countries. So an example of that is Pacific Islander countries were colonized both by Westerners and other Asian countries. And colonization, depending on your viewpoint, continues to occur beyond the 16th, 17th century under the premise of neoliberalism, anti-terrorism, and so on. So colonialism's impact on mental health. Intergenerational trauma. Today we invited our keynote speaker, Dr. Jacob Palm, who works with Stephanie Fu who is the author of What My Bones Know. And I think she does an incredible job talking about intergenerational trauma. And then, of course, the rejection of kind of our ancestral healing practices and wisdom, which generates and perpetuates a lot of shame and stigma. And then the Eurocentric approaches to our current understanding and treatment of mental health that continues to be upheld by systemic privilege, centered on individualism and kind of divorced from family and community. So from the Padlet, well, I'll get to the Padlet later, but so what does decolonizing mental health mean? There's obviously no one definition, but it acknowledges collective, historical, and intergenerational trauma and healing, and it decenters mental health away from the dominant white heteronormative, patriarchal, gender binary, etc., many other isms, narrative. And from the Padlet, like I've seen the words uncovering, recovering, and returning home. I love these words. They're so heartwarming and empowering to read. So I just really love that. So, you know, colonization and decolonization is closely tied to racism, right? Racism and discrimination are kind of the rationale for and legacies of colonialism. Everybody's still good? Everybody can hear me, see me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
Yes.
I feel like I'm talking into nowhere. Thank you. So as I'm sure you're all familiar, this is a Harper's weekly article in 1879. And so I'm bringing us to more modern history, right? And you can't really see here, but it says the blacks must go and the Chinese must go. The poor barbarians can't understand our civilized republican form of government. And so, and then in 1892, the Chinese Exclusion Act, it was the first time in US history that a specific ethnic group was barred from immigration and naturalization. And then in 1965, that quota for Asian immigrants increased, primarily based on professional, it was letting in a lot of professionals, very restrictive, but still that quota was increased. There was a presidential executive order in 1942, which led to the internment of many Japanese Americans during World War II. These are just examples, right? There's so many more. And then the nuclear testing in the Pacific Islands between the 1940s and 50s, 23 nuclear devices were detonated in the Marshall Islands. It wasn't until 1989 that a formal apology was given by the US. And so now we come back to something that, you know, the conversation has increased around the kind of model minority stereotype, especially with COVID-19. But Asian Americans are this is a statement from the Pew Center Research Center in 2012, so not too long ago. Asian Americans are the highest income, best educated, and fastest growing racial group in the US. They're more satisfied than the general public with their lives, finances, and direction of the country. And they place more value than other Americans do on marriage, parenthood, hard work, career success, according to a comprehensive new nationwide survey by our center. So fascinating. So, you know, embarrassingly, I didn't actually know the origins of model minority stereotype until I worked for and currently I'm affiliated with the Center for the Study for Asian American Health at NYU. But it was explicitly developed by the conservative majority to oppose the Black Power movement in the 1960s. I'm embarrassed that I don't know, but I obviously never learned this in school. And so by doing so, they said, you know, the success of Asian Americans, you know, look at them. If you try hard, then you can do well in this country. And the reason why Blacks are not doing well is because they're not trying hard. success of Americans, Asian Americans, is denying that existence of institutional racism. So and now we kind of fast forward to COVID-19 and the kind of rise. You know, it's always been in existence, but the kind of rise of anti-Asian racism. And so there was the Atlanta spa mass shootings in March 2021. The kind of narrative around that, to me at least, was incredibly gaslighting. For example, in the New York Times, they said, you know, 8 are dead with fears of anti-Asian bias. And then, of course, that was that statement from Robert Aaron Long, who said, you know, the shooting suspect had a bad day before the massacre, kind of interestingly bringing out a mental health argument to doing a mass shooting that was not racially motivated. I think this infographic is really interesting because it shows it's all the Google searches. Somebody analyzed them, Rennie and Burrito. And so what you see here is that from February to March, so during the kind of like the explosion of the COVID-19 pandemic, the keyword searches, obviously coronavirus, COVID-19 increased, but then Chinese virus, Chinese flu, and Kung flu, all of those dramatically increased as a Google search. And of course, Kung flu is something that was uttered by then President Trump. My bias in my work is that I always do intersectional work, meaning I do have a difficult time looking at just race only. So a lot of my work does focus on kind of the combination of race and gender. So I just want to put that in there. I might be outdating myself, but still, when I walk on the streets, you know, I hear "me so horny, me love you long time." And I find that fascinating. And I kind of found out within the past few years that there was actually a movie in 1987 called The Full Metal Jacket. And there's a scene where the Vietnamese sex workers are propositioning a Marine, a US Marine, with this. And then this line was later sampled by a hip hop group, Me So Horny, and then it reached #1 in the US Billboard rap tracks in 1989. So I was like, wow, there is a reason why this is still used as a pickup line. And then here on the right, you see Chun-Li. It's a character in a game, video game, Street Fighter. I also did not know it was one of the highest grossing video game franchises of all time. So I know Chun-Li because my brother played video games as a kid. But you see here, obviously very sexualized, I guess Chinese sexualized woman. But this is her like signature move in the video game. So she, that kind of, yeah. So now I'm going to do a little bit of just like a very brief kind of what we know in terms of data. I don't want to steal the thunder because we do have a research panel coming up as one of the 3 panels at 11 a.m. But just like a really kind of trying to give you what's out there right now. So in terms of any mental illness, national data show that Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Asian folks have the lowest in terms of any mental health illness. As you see by the red arrows indicated here on the bottom. And then but we have to see that the same national data also show lowest mental health service utilization among Asians, which you see the arrow here. Oh, sorry. You see the bar here, they have the lowest mental health utilization. But then we go and look at the question mark here, which is the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. And there are no estimates because the sample size is so small. And this is, again, to remind you, a national data set. Dr. Andy Subika is a panelist on the research panel, and he thankfully kind of fills that gap for NHPI data. And so this is not national data, but according to his study, 35% of US Pacific Islanders reported needing services and 26% of them avoiding or delaying needed services. When we look at New York City, we do have some disaggregated data that show, so it is a little hard to see for you all here, but it's disaggregated by various regions here, so Southeast Asian, South Asian, and East Asian. And you see the bar here, so Cambodian folks have the highest depression risk, above both South Asians and East Asians. And we see Indo-Caribbeans. I don't know how you all feel about Indo-Caribbean being South Asian. I know that's also a contentious issue. And then we see generally that the Southeast Asian folks here have highest depression risk when we disaggregate by ethnicity. And then in terms of youth, the focus of our symposium today, Asian American youth have higher overall suicide attempt rate compared to the average American youth. So when we look at specific mental health disorders, there's some disparities. And then among those young folks, Asian Americans are the only racial group for whom suicide is the leading cause of death. And then relative to non-Hispanic whites, NHPI youth had higher prevalence of depressed mood and suicidal thoughts, planning, and attempts. Again, not national data. And so what are some, again, this is a very short list of things, very simplified list of things, but what are some factors that impact our mental health? A culture of stress and parent-child conflict negatively impacting mental health. I think this comes up in a lot of our listening sessions, right? How the intergenerational conflict itself, as well as having conversations about mental health, is a challenge that I've heard from our community members. And then expectations around familial obligations, it serves as a stressor and not always beneficial to mental health. And research report, they kind of say, oh, we're so family oriented, and that's, that makes us a model minority, but it has goods and bad. And then a strong sense of ethnic identity compared to how one perceives their American identity is a protective factor against suicidal ideation. And then maintenance of our mother tongue, Asian language, as a protective factor against depressive symptoms for those who are born outside of the US. This, slide is also very oversimplified, but the kind of barriers to service utilization, stigma, obviously that's a huge topic. And there's a lack of perceived need for services. Insurance and high costs are issue. And of course, I'm sure, as we all know, lack of culturally and linguistically congruent service providers. Thought I would illustrate mental health stigma rather than talking about it academically, but just sharing some of the quotes from a qualitative study among youth, among Asian American youth. My parents see me as an average girl and say, I don't know why you want to see a counselor. You've done nothing wrong. My parents may think you're hiding something from them that you're not willing to share with them. And I think mental health is less obvious than physical health, and parents would think that you would be best if you just figure it out. So this resonates with me quite a bit, thinking about how I was raised. Jeremy Lin is a NBA basketball player based from New York City. And so he says, my whole life I tried to run from being an Asian, and when I was on the basketball court and the ball was not matter. It was my safe space to be myself without being the token Asian. By the time Linsanity came around, I got worldwide recognition, and the only thing people wanted to talk about was my ethnicity and race, and oftentimes in very demeaning and condescending and just racist ways. And so being a 9-year NBA veteran doesn't protect me from being called coronavirus on the court. Jeremy Lin also says mental health is something that isn't easy to talk about in our community. Too often we fight through or brush it under the rug. And with the rise in anti-Asian racism and the unique struggles that we go through, I'm realizing more and more there's so much freedom in talking about our experiences. So I didn't explicitly call this out. And again, I don't want to steal the thunder for the data panel, research panel upcoming, but as you may have noticed, there's generally a lack on AAPI and mental health. There's a lack of data around AAPI health generally, but even more so on mental health and even more so specific to AAPI youth and young adults. And then we see a lack of disaggregation by race ethnicity. Even our national surveillance data combine AAPI, for example, quite often, and HPI. And these are all consequences of, I want to bring it back to the point of historical, colonial, and racist ideologies. We need to, I think, and I'm sure many others think, we need to involve youth and young adults more in our decolonization efforts to make this better. So goals for today, this is from our steering committee, create a space to grieve what we have lost during the past 3 years, revitalize ourselves, celebrate resilience, and explore new ways of wellness and humility. And for our youth in particular, provide the connections, mentorship, and community they need during a time when so many are struggling. I would also love to add my hopes for us to reflect on our kind of individual positionality. That's a very academic word, right? But thinking about how our privileges and non-privileges inform our views and what that means. And thinking about our identities beyond race and ethnicity. Have uncomfortable but respectful conversations. Co-learning, I think, is a big part of decolonization. Selfishly, really, I just want to learn more from youth and young adults today. So please speak up. Today, I just wanted to briefly go over, so we just had the setting the stage, and I'll open it up for some questions and comments, of course. And then we have our keynote speaker today, Dr. Jacob Palm, at 10 a.m. And then 11, we have our 3 panels that are happening simultaneously. And so we have kind of a research panel, we have a kind of caregiving panel, and then a kind of a clinician-led panel. So please stay on for all these panels. I'm offering you the agenda just for the morning. There's a whole afternoon portion as well as a kind of a portion right after these panels as well. Before I introduce the keynote speaker, I guess I will stop sharing here and open it up for any comments or questions, observations.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Nice to meet all of you virtually. Am I saying your name right, Sahnah?
Yes, that's correct.
I really want to say I appreciate your being transparent about your diagnosis. I've had many private conversations with all of my friends about what they're going through, but it's a whole other thing to be able to be public about it. And I think every time someone does that, it helps a set of people or group of people. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I think it is my first time sharing publicly. So I appreciate that. And I do acknowledge that a lot of us are here today and doing the work that we do because it's informed by our personal experiences, right? I do a lot of research with survivors of violence, and it's not uncommon for folks to have their own personal experiences that really kind of provide that inspiration for that work. We have a question in the chat, copies of the slides. Yes, we will send the copies of slides out. We will also have recordings of all the sessions available on our website.
Wanting to share a question in the Q&A. How is decolonizing mean in a mental health context? What makes mental health work decolonizing?
Oh, that's a big question. I would love for others to chime in, but I think colonization, I could argue it impacted us. Most importantly, it impacted our mental health intergenerationally. And so, yeah, I think it's really important that we, out of any other health outcome, and then I would love to include spiritual, right? It really impacted and continues to impact us today in terms of our mental health work. But I think a lot of us shared on the Padlet, and if others would like to jump in terms of what does it mean? And of course, we'll continue to tackle this today in all of our panels.
I just maybe want to chime in a little bit to what Sahnah also said. Sorry. I think decolonization really starts with like reflecting on the practices and how we see what's normal, right? And and I think there's also constraints to decolonization, right? Because like you might have that lens, but you also need to pay your bills, right? And insurance company it's not only like mental health practitioners have that training is Eurocentric, but also like the different structures that support it, right? The billing companies, right? What medication gets denied, what medication gets used, right? So I think like we're not saying like we have all the answers, but definitely like this conference is about like a place for us to think about these things together and also to challenge ourselves, right? Because like we all in some ways participate. And I think our keynote speaker, Jacob Ham, will kind of explore that more. And it's also something that we'll talk explicitly more about in our different panels, like for the caregiving, the research, right? And even the clinician panel, what does decolonization mean specifically in those contexts?
I also see a question, could you talk more about how spiritual affects your mental health? I realized this very late in my life, but I was raised with ancestral worship, and where I gain my power and my peace is through thinking about my family and ancestors. And so for me, like my spirituality in the way that I was raised is very important for my mental health and resilience. So it might not be the case for everyone. And of course, we all have very different definitions and ways of practicing spirituality. But for me, I think it's it's a critical component of mental health. I don't know if Dr. Hom is here quite yet. If we do have time, no further comments, I would love for our steering committee members to introduce themselves. Han, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Han Nguyen. My pronouns are she, hers, and Kwe. I am part of the steering committee and representing the New York Coalition for Asian American Mental Health. I am a social worker, so my background, I'm an LMSW here in New York. And I'm excited to be with you all today. I am going to be facilitating the clinical panel, and we will dig into more of what that looks like at a mental health practice with other clinicians with this kind of decolonized lens, and hear more about their practices and what they have to offer to share with us, in this space too. So I'm glad to be here with everyone. Liza, you want to go? I see your hand go up.
Yeah, I was just cheering you on, Han. Good morning, everybody. My name is Liza King, and I work from the New York City Health Department. So I come here from a kind of a different space. I don't work in the Division of Mental Hygiene. I work in the Bureau of Epidemiology Services, and I'm going to be facilitating the research panel, where I think some of the really interesting things we want to think about when we decolonize mental health and research might be, the fact that sometimes Asian groups aren't even shown in the data, or that sometimes Asian studies are studies that working with Asian communities aren't funded, and really thinking through some of the ways that the systems of research aren't providing us with the information that we need. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm going to pass it over to Lynn.
Hi, so my name's Lynn Ann. I'm trained as a psychological anthropologist. I currently teach Asian American Studies at Hunter College. I also run Chinese American Family Alliance for Mental Health, and I work with Cindy on that. We provide monthly support groups for families caring for someone that has a chronic and severe mental illness. We also do a lot of psychoeducation for Asian American youth. So I'm just going to pass it on to my colleague, Cindy Gray.
Yeah, my name is Cindy, pronouns she, her. So thank you, Lynn, for the smooth introduction. I'm actually trained as a preschool teacher. I taught pre-K for early childhood special education in Virginia and California. And now here in New York, I am a senior program coordinator for Parent Corps in the Center for Early Childhood Health and Development at NYU. And I work with Lynn, as she said, for CAFAM, supporting youth programming there. I am biracial, Japanese and white, and I also live in Astoria, Queens, New York, with my wife and my massively rotund 14-pound cat, and they both bring me a lot of joy. I'm really excited to be here with you all today, and I'll be supporting Lynn in facilitating the caregiver panel, and also we'll see you all if you are joining us in the afternoon for the in-person youth panel, which is going to be co-facilitated by Lynn and Florence. So I'll pass it off to Florence.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited just to see all of your faces today. Thank you for sharing space with us. My name is Florence Almeda. I got involved with this work last year during a fellowship at the Department of Health. Right now, I'm currently a research coordinator at Columbia School of Nursing, doing a lot of work in a music therapy space. And I'm just very excited to be here. I recently graduated from Tufts University. I studied public health and music. So with that in mind, I'm just very excited to be facilitating the Educational Pathways panel later with Lynn. So if anyone's in person in New York, come by. We're going to have that going on, and then some workshops in the afternoon that are really exciting. But very excited for all of the speakers and panelists today.
Thank you, everyone. Without further ado, I would love to introduce our keynote speaker. I mentioned Stephanie Fu's book. What I learned through in the audiobook, she shares her therapy sessions with Dr. Hom, and I was just floored. I came away with that saying, wow, therapy can be a co-learning experience. And I have an inkling, even though I have not interacted with Dr. Hom, that he will be too modest to talk about how amazing those sessions were. But so excited to have you here. Dr. Hom is a clinical psychologist, associate professor, and director of the Center for Child Trauma and Resilience at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. And so his focus is really on trauma-informed practices throughout New York City, and trains and consults on trauma-informed engagement. And still maintains a clinical practice for children, families, and adults. And so he received his PhD at UMass Boston and finished clinical training at Harvard Medical School's Mass General Hospital and Children's Hospital Boston. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I should just start. It's so crazy seeing how many people there are on this talk. This is the biggest Zoom meeting I've ever been in. And I actually know some of these people. I can't believe, like, Alexa, Rebecca, Yikai, what are you doing here? I was like, so weird. And it's also weird to be doing a keynote. Keynotes are supposed to be formal, but this doesn't feel like it should be formal. It's really about, like, talking to these young people who are interested in joining the profession that I ended up in. and somehow making it feel like somehow inspiring them while also cautioning them, I guess. Some people were talking about what does decolonization mean, and I honestly don't know the word. Like, I'm past 50 years old, and so I'm one of those old people who like barely get gender pronouns correctly or correct, I guess. I had to like read a bunch of articles on it. And so I was originally uncertain whether or not I'd be a good person to do a keynote, but I think it actually can make sense if we do it right. If we as a group do this keynote together, right? So with that, I invite you to be an active participant in the keynote. It's going to be hard for me to talk while reading chats, but someone else can do that for me. And I think I'll just tell my story about how I ended up in this profession and see if that resonates for any of you. And what I'm also going to do is that I put my Zoom such that I'm hiding everyone with their videos off, but I would love to see some faces, but only the ones that like me. Like if you're bored and you're like flipping through TikTok, don't turn your Zoom on. That'll be disheartening. But if you're like really vibing with what is happening, what I'm saying, then I want to talk to you. But I haven't even started yet. You don't know if I'm going to be any good. This is well, you can turn it off as well if it's not working for you. Good. This is feeling much better. Okay. So let's see. I am Jacob Ham. I was born in Korea. My mother's actually a refugee, a North Korean refugee, Kim Jong-un and all that guy, all that stuff, Dennis Rodman's favorite country, I guess. Let's see, do you want pictures? I don't want to do too many pictures. This is a cool picture that I found on the internet of this person, like a refugee picture, people like escaping North Korea. And I had watched this video called I watched this movie called Ode to My Father. Some of you might have seen this. It's like really heartbreaking. It captures like Korean pathos really well. And the movie starts with this boy and his family trying to escape a village in North Korea. The Chinese are about to ransack the village, and the U.S. naval ships are escaping, and all the Korean villagers are begging for the naval ships to take them with them, but they have a dilemma because they have all these heavy military artillery weapons, and if they leave it for the Chinese, then the Chinese are going to use it against them. And so the captain has to decide whether to take the people or the weapons. And obviously, at the last second, he says, leave the weapons, grab the cannolis, and then grab the people. That's a Godfather reference. Sorry, I know it's outdated. And then people like end up on the boat, and they come down with them to South Korea. This is an actual photo of that event taken from a Korean newspaper. And when I told my mother about that movie, I was like, have you seen that movie? And she goes, what are you talking about? I lived it. I was one of those kids that was on one of those boats. It was crazy to hear that. And she was like 11 or 12 years old when that happened. She said that I don't have any grandfathers to speak of. I don't feel like I have any connection to my ancestral lineage. And part of the reason is because we had Japanese occupation from the 1900s to the 1950s or early 1900s. And one of my grandfathers died on a landmine trying to escape North Korea. Another one died early. I don't know how men survived during occupation and war. And then my parents didn't finish high school. My father was a drill sergeant in the South Korean army. We only made it to America because my oldest aunt, the matriarch of our family, had married a GI from the Korean War, a sergeant major from the Korean Army, from the U.S. Army. And he was like this guy from Tennessee, and he was like complete I don't know, I can say this, I think, because he's family, but he's like complete redneck. And they're very racist. And I grew up in Texas, in the South, deep in the South, where the KKK still marched every year that I was growing up. And one of my earliest memories was that my mom had taken me and my sister to a field to just enjoy the field. And she had made us these like flower necklaces and bracelets. And on the walk home, this car drove by and threw a Slurpee at us and yelled, "Go back to Vietnam," and shit like that. And so that was a regular occurrence in my growing up. Like the racism was pretty real. And it was after the Vietnam War. And so people were telling us to go back to Vietnam. And I'd be like, "I'm Korean, you MFer," or whatever I might say. Let's see. Here is a picture, random picture that I took, a collage of. This was me in my cowboy boots in Texas, driving in front of the car that I actually drove when I was 16 years old. That's Chevy. Talking about my father became a blue collar welder. He was making oil drill bits in Texas during the oil boom in the 80s. My mother would and he worked the night shift, and then my mother had a grocery store, just like your typical every mom and pop shop in New York even. And they retired off a dry cleaner. So like we're totally classic Korean immigrants, like second wave Korean immigrants, not the first wave. And let's see, what else is there to say? Life was hard. Life was just hard. And this is a picture that I drew in high school, trying to capture how hard life was for me. There. 16 years old, I sketched that for a competition. I got second place for it. But this one guy afterwards, he like pulled me aside and he said, "Thanks for that picture. I get that." And that was better than a first place prize. Let's see, what else can I tell you? So I didn't go into art school. I went to college. My parents put all of our money into education, like the common thing. So I went to Catholic school my whole life. I went to a Jesuit college prep. I had to do work study. So I worked on the weekends at the school. During the summers, I painted the classrooms and like mowed the football fields. And then the guidance counselor at the school was a Brown alum. And he took me to Brown from Texas, and he like did a tour of all the Ivy Leagues in the area. And he wrote me a nice letter, I think. I think that's maybe how I got to Brown. And I went to Brown University. I'd never left Texas before. I was like a poor kid growing up in Texas. And if anyone knows, like Brown doesn't have a core curriculum. So you don't have to study anything you don't want to or take any classes you don't want to. So I ended up I double majored in psychology and religious studies. And then for the rest of my credits, I just painted all the time because I really wanted to just go to art school. But there was no way that I was going to become an artist when, as a first generation immigrant, that's not possible. It's not that my mom even cared, but I think that I cared for her sake. And the truth is that when I was in college, I really wanted to be a monastic. I wanted to join a monastery after grad school. After college, I mean. The Catholic stuff really did hit home, even though I didn't want to be a Catholic monastic. I wanted to be a monastic of some kind. And I used to come home and I used to tell her, "Mom, I'm going to the monastery after this. You okay with that?" And she's like, "Okay, whatever." And I said, "Mom, we have like $60,000 to $80,000 worth of debt. I don't know if you can pay that off in a monastery. Are you going to be okay with this?" And she wouldn't mind. And I said, "Mom, what the hell? What? Are you going to let me waste our like Ivy League education? I'm like the eldest son of the eldest son. And I like the pride of the whole, like the reason why my aunt feels like it was worth the sacrifices to immigrate to the US. You're going to lose all that to let me go into the monastery after I get my like Ivy League education." And this was like junior year during lunch or something. I said, "What gives?" And then she said, okay, I'll tell you. And she said, "When you were born, we were in the house and this monk came into our house and didn't know who he was, and he just wandered in. And I said, "Can I help you? What are you doing here?" And then he just kept wandering around. And then he said, "Oh, that's why," when he found me. And she said, "What?" And he said, "There's this weird apparitional thing above your house, and I don't know what it is. And I was just trying to figure out what that is." And she said, "That he's the reason. What is that?" Or he said, "What was your birth dream of him?" Because in Korea, a lot of mothers have birth dreams where they have a dream and then that's how they know that they're pregnant. And so she said, "I was climbing a mountain and I slipped and I started to fall, and then the mountain crumbled and as I was falling, it collapsed into my belly, and I woke up and I knew that I was pregnant." And then he said, "Oh, that means he's going to be like a mountain of a man someday, but he's going to be of weak constitution," which I was. I was small and frail and scrawny. And he said, "Give me some string and I'll take it to the temple and I'll pray for his longevity." That was it. If he was a con artist, he got his piece of string, I guess. I don't know what. And then a few days later, a nun, a Buddhist nun, also wandered by and did the same thing and asked for string. And they also said, "Don't tell him, because it'll go to his head and he'll become too arrogant." And so she was trying to hold it from me as long as she could. But that's why she didn't care that I was making all these weird proclamations about going to the monastery. She thought it was part of my destiny. And I did love my religious studies courses. They were my favorite. I still rely on them more than I do my psychology degree. I studied mystical traditions across the great religions. So I was reading Buddhism, Meister Eckhart, the great 13th century mystics in Catholicism, Sufism, Kabbalah, stuff like that. But at the end of it, I couldn't turn away from getting the doctor behind my name for my aunt's sake, if not for my mother's sake. Even though I didn't want to be a medical doctor, I could at least be called a doctor as a psychologist. I thought that psychology was the closest I could become, the closest thing to being a philosopher, an applied philosopher in modern day times. And then I also thought that I could do more art. So the comments are blowing up and it's kind of distracting. I'm so sorry. I wish I could respond to all of this that's happening, but I'm glad that it's resonating for people. So I went into psychology instead, and there's a whole story around that, but I don't think I have a lot of time to tell the story about how I ultimately decided to be a psychologist. But yeah, it's so hard to not tell that story. Oh my God. Let's see. I have like 20 minutes, 35 minutes. Let me think about the time. Okay. So I accidentally got into grad school right out of college. I wish I hadn't. This was like 25 years ago. I forget, 95, 94. Shoot, that's 35 years ago. And I was burnt out with classes. I hated school. I thought that classes in psychology was really dumb. I barely studied throughout most of my life. But at least I was in a program where cultural competence was really important. And that really helped. Like the people that nurtured me, my mentors who supported me, really gave me some guidance about how to be a psychologist that was good for me. And so I learned about power and how important power is, power dynamics in the interpersonal relationship, and who holds power and how to share power in the relationship and to be thoughtful about that. I learned about when I was still training, it was right when psychodynamic psychotherapy was still kind of the norm, but CBT was starting to ascend. So I was taught in psychodynamic psychotherapy, and I still use a lot of it. But if you're going to go into the field, then you might, you should learn it still. But there's a few ideas that just didn't work for a person of color. And one of them is something called neutrality. it's the idea that you are just like a blank slate, and that your patients, they project stuff onto you, like their mother issues, their father issues. Hey, oh my God, Chang. Wow, weird. Um, um, they project that stuff onto you. And so you have to not be present so that they can do all this projection stuff onto you. And then you can see what they're projecting onto you. It doesn't work when you look different. Like they already make assumptions about who you are. You're locked into something. Like sometimes I would have people, and the first time they would see me, they'd say, "Oh, I thought I was expecting an old Jewish guy with a first name like Jacob." And I say, "Sorry." And then being male, being young, having a wedding ring, how you dress. People are always hunting for who you are as a therapist. So stop lying about it. Stop hiding it. Be honest about it. Be honest about your assumptions. Be honest about your prejudices and your biases and even your ideological biases. And then you start the dialogue with, like, I feel like doing therapy is almost like playing poker, but everyone has to put their cards on the table. And you just start, you still try to like figure out how to make everyone win, I guess. I don't know. The metaphor falls apart at some point. But that level of it was weird to be trained to become a white male, a white old Jewish guy in a profession where like identity wasn't really taught. And so you had to like figure it out on your own in some ways. And then the other thing that's really weird about psychodynamic psychotherapy is that you know the answer in some way. Some people will say that you're supposed to just be the facilitator, the free-floating ego. But there are also some models where you know the interpretive answer, you know what's going on, and your client or patient might not be ready for the truth. And so you slowly dole it out to them. And so that's a really oppressive version of the psychodynamic model. I'll tell you about the one that I ultimately enjoyed, but that was really hard. Oh, and then I was also told by one of my favorite mentors that my emotional antennae were too sensitive. And it's very true. I'm extremely sensitive emotionally. So she said that she was worried that I would burn out and that I would like pick up my countertransference would be triggered too much. And countertransference is whenever I start projecting my own stuff onto the patient or client. And then it's really dangerous when that stuff happens. It is true that it's really dangerous and we have to be aware of that stuff. Okay. So then I went to an internship where it touted itself for giving rigorous training in psychodynamic psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. And then I was also a child person. So I was in this solo track of doing child work as well as psychodynamic and cognitive behavioral. And honestly, I couldn't stand cognitive behavioral therapy. And I feel like that's, if we're talking about oppressive frameworks, cognitive behavioral, sorry, I'm going to get kicked out of my American Psychological Association for saying this, but cognitive behavioral therapy just never sat well for me. It's based on the scientific method. It's based on reductionism. And if you know anything about the scientific method, then you basically assume that everything is wrong until you prove it to be right, basically. And so you throw away everything and then you only collect the stuff that can pass some kind of evidence-based test. And maybe that's the thing that you guys are going to fall into now. The biggest CBT, the thing that CBT morphed into is evidence-based practice. And that can become you have to be a very well-informed consumer to know what evidence-based practice really means. And that's a whole other conversation. But just never forget to trust your own gut and how your patients receive you. Maybe that's what I'm going to try to figure out, how to summarize this into lessons for you as you're like finding your own path. Okay, so the other thing that CBT does is that they teach you that you have to convince the client to work in the way that you're about to show them. Like you teach them the scientific method. You teach them like, all of your assumptions are just hypotheses and you have to like gather evidence to test them. And that's a weird thing to say. Like it's a very rigorously Western model. And I couldn't believe when it would work. So it does work. And it's good for certain things like anxiety disorders or if you have really bad cognitive distortions. But even then, I'm not sure that, I'm sure there are many other ways to do it. Yes, it is considered the gold standard. It has the most evidence. But if you figure out why CBT has the most evidence, it's because it's the most easy to measure, it's the most easy to quantify, it's measurable, so it's studied more. It's teachable to new students because you have a manual and you can just make them do the manual. It doesn't teach them the art of being present with another person, and it doesn't teach them the art of being, shoot. Well, what I was going to say doesn't make any sense yet. I had learned trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy funded by the city in 2017 and by Tony Manarino, the developer of the model. And he's the one who was trying to teach me that whenever people want to talk about their own agenda, you very gently like nudge them to go back to the agenda of the model, because you have certain number of sessions to get through with the model, and you have to remind them of what you're trying to accomplish. And then in that first year, when we were doing cognitive behavioral therapy, the last thing you do is do a trauma narrative where you get them to write a story about the trauma that they experienced. It does work, and the science behind it is very sound. But try to get a 16-year-old girl to talk about her rape when she was 12. It doesn't happen in 14 sessions. So I took my sweet time. It took me like a year to get her to talk about it. And then when she did, I'm going to avoid the details because I don't want to trigger anyone. The gist of it was that she told the story in such a way that I immediately needed to throw up. There's nothing in the manual that says, this is what you do when you feel like throwing up when you hear the first trauma narrative you've ever heard. And so I did the relational thing. I said, I need to throw up. And she said, me too. And then we just said, let's just take a moment and breathe together. And and then she's like, oh, yes, now you get what it's like to have to tell this story. And I'm willing to tell you more if you're going to keep needing to throw up from that. Okay, what else is there? Okay, so that's CBT. Grad school was hard. I couldn't find my home. I didn't like psychodynamic psychotherapy. I didn't like cognitive behavioral therapy. I barely got through training. I didn't buy any of the science either. And then I ended up at Beth Israel in New York. And I found these incredible mentors. And they did something called relational psychoanalysis. And they are premised on Hegel, which I loved. No, not Hegel. Who's the I thou guy? Buber. Their lineage was Buber, attachment theory, developmental psychoanalysis, and I had just finished a postdoc on mother-infant interaction stuff with one of the forefathers of developmental psychoanalysis. And then what they did instead of if you have psychodynamic supervision, it sounds like mental masturbation. It sounds like you're just coming up with formulations about what the person is going through, but it doesn't tell you what you do with them in the room. It's all very cerebral. But these guys were doing supervision where they were like, give us the hardest moment in the session and let's role play that. And let's imagine what that person was feeling and let's imagine what you were feeling. And once we figure out what could be going on between the two of you, let's figure out how to talk about that. And so it's like super relational. It's super focused on what's happening here and now between the two of us. And the model is really profound because it's saying that everything that psychodynamic psychotherapy believes in, like all the formulations about people's pathologies and relational patterns and all that, it's all important, but it all gets played out moment to moment in the here and now. Your moment to moment will be a fractal of everything you need to know. And you'll learn this when you go into supervision. Like the first session gives you a microcosm of your entire therapy, and it plays out to be very true if you know how to look. So it captured the psychodynamic stuff, and then the cognitive behavioral stuff it captured as well, because it said once you start to figure out what their issues are relationally, then you help them practice being a different way in the room with you. So it does capture homework, it captures behavioral change, but it's all done in vivo in the relationship. And they say that, and then they said that transference, countertransference stuff, that stuff is really important too, but it's even more important than you realize. It's actually that your stuff can never be hidden. Your stuff and their stuff are always going to be mixing together and creating new stuff. And then the point is to start looking at that stuff together. And then when you are in this state of reflectiveness and awareness, then you're in the good place. That made a lot of sense. And then the last thing that I loved so much was it was all playful. They said, you get to go figure things out. Everything's a mystery, everything court surprise. It should feel exciting and unknown to you when you're in the room. And that was so much better than the rigid, we all have a framework, we're experts, we know what we're doing, we know what's wrong, and now we just have to convince people that this is what it is. And then they have to follow our guidance about how to get better. That was how I was experiencing the other training I was getting. Oh, and the last thing is that the DSM, oh my God, don't ever read the DSM. Please do not read the DSM, because every chapter you get through, you will diagnose yourself with that very thing that is being talked about. Everyone fits all of those things. There's only like a handful of the diagnoses that actually have some real like biological weight that does like inform treatment. But a lot of it is just like us trying to parse out phenomenon that shouldn't be parsed out like that. It's that whole reductionism thing again. Does that make sense? Okay. At least to the people nodding. And okay, good. I have no idea what's happening with the 100 other people that aren't on, but at least you guys that are on with me. Yes, that's true too. The DSM helps justify billing and treatment. But when you're in the room with a patient, it almost, for some people, it feels like a relief to know that there's a name for what they're going through. But for other people, it becomes pathologizing. It did for me. Like I classified myself with like 7 different diagnoses, and my therapist would just laugh. And I still do it with my primary care physician. And the primary care physician told me never to Google before a visit with him. Okay, so where are we? Oh, I learned to play in relational psychoanalysis. I'm writing a book, and it's going to talk about how like I closed my door for 20 years. I didn't listen to anyone else anymore. And I just wanted to figure out how therapy works between me and the person in front of me, letting everything go. And it's been 20 years and I'm like coming out of the door, and I think I'm going to write a book about what I learned. But there's some other things that I wanted to share about what I learned, just to help summarize, give you the gist of it. The relational thing is incredibly important. At some point, I accidentally got grants in trauma work. And so I became a trauma expert somehow. And I had to play the role of a trauma expert until I actually did enough trauma work that I felt like I understood what was going on with trauma. And I think for sure, trauma as a diagnosis, no, not as a diagnosis, as a phenomenon, is real. And there's a lot of really powerful things that you can learn about how the human body works through understanding the impact of trauma and overwhelming stress. The key one that I want to tell you now, especially in this context, is that we have 2 ways of being in the world. One is based on fear and survival, and the other one is based on, don't tell anyone I said this, but it's based on love and presence. And the fear and survival part, what it does to your brain is that it makes you need an answer. It makes you think in black and white terms. It makes you think that there's a right answer. It makes you hypervigilant to threat. And it's hard to play learn, and hold complex ideas. That's the gist of what survival brain does. And once it's on, it's really sticky. Once you learn to be in survival brain, it's really hard to stop being in survival brain. It's that whole better be safe than sorry motif. And a lot of our parents taught us, like the tiger parenting and all the parenting that we all grew up in, that's all survival parenting. It's all like, forget emotions, pay rent, get your money straight so that there's food on the table. If you're Korean, you know like how weird it is that the way to greet a Korean person is to say, oh, you look like you gained weight. Oh, you lost weight. It's all, and then the second thing you ask is, did you eat? That's all survival. There are many years when that was it was like down to just whether or not you ate. And our parents still parent us that way. Like, my mom had this dry cleaning business. She's the owner of a dry cleaning business. And I went home from college and I was like sitting with her and I looked at her sock and I was like, Mom, why is there a hole on the top of your sock where the ankle is, where the ankle bend is? Why is there a hole there? And I said, Mom, there's another hole next to it. How the heck can you wear out the top of your socks? It makes no sense. And then she laughed and she said, anytime my sock gets a hole, she wears tube socks only. And anytime the sock gets a hole, she just rotates it 90 degrees and just keeps wearing it out until like the whole thing has a hole all the way around. Like, oh my God, Mom, you own a dry cleaner. You can afford to buy socks. But she just couldn't stop living that way in that scarcity that she grew up with. Okay, so that's real. Survival brain is real, and it takes a lot of effort to figure out what your own survival brain looks like. And if you're a new clinician, I will tell you that when you feel like you need to read a manual, follow a manual, need someone to tell you what to do, sometimes that's real. Sometimes that's actually survival brain in action when you assume that you're helpless. And if you have a good supervisor, then they're tracking whether or not you're in survival brain or not. Or when you start to assume the worst in people, when you think that they're here to just like reprimand you or hurt you in some way, or they don't care about you, those are all survival assumptions that are being made. Okay, the second thing is that this presence thing is profound, and it's a mystery. It's really hard to quantify what presence really looks like. What I would say is that it feels like wholeness. You actually can feel your heart, your head, your body, and your soul. Talking about spirituality, like there has to be a sense of sacredness. When you're in a state of true presence, there's a sense of divine sacredness to the moment that you're in. Time expands. There's no pressed time. There's the infinite time of just being present with another person. There's a bunch of C words that are associated with presence. And in the new model of internal family systems, it's part of what they call the true self. But it's like there's a sense of connectedness between yourself and the other person. There's a sense of calm. There's a sense of centeredness. There's a compassion that emanates from both. And what happens is that I'll tell you one of the first stories where I learned the power of this. I was meeting with this one social worker. It was like 8 o'clock at night. It would be after her whole day's work was done. And this was like first year, second year learning relational psychoanalysis. And one day, it was always on a Wednesday night too. And she yawned, or no, not she, I yawned, oops. And she was talking and I was yawning. And then she said, "You're doing it again." I said, "What?" I said, "You're yawning." And like, obviously that's mortifying, right? And from a relational perspective, I said, "I know. To tell you the truth, I'm really bored right now. I'm not listening to what you're saying." And then that's outrageous. Don't do that. Be careful if you're going to do something like that. And she said, "Me too. I'm so bored." And I said, "What's going on with us?" what's going on with you? And she said, to tell you the truth, I don't want to talk today. I don't want to tell you what I need to talk to you about because I'm so ashamed of it. And so I'm just like blabbing. I'm like talking about the weather because I'm trying to avoid talking. But at the same time, I want you to like me. So I'm performing. I'm saying the things that I think you want me to say. And then she said, I'm so worried that you're going to find me boring. And I was in that moment. And then, but in that, my response to her was something like, right now, I'm wide awake and I'm not bored. Because what we had done is that when you get stuck in reenactments, your body knows. You'll either get bored, annoyed, you'll start to feel like an expert, or some weird thing happens where you're no longer centered. And you have to track what your markers are for when you're out of attunement or when you're stuck in a reenactment. And then in the relational model, and in a truly non-oppressed, purely respectful human model, you just have to name it. You say, something's happening between us that's making me feel a little turned off, a little pushed away. But I don't want to be that. I want to be present with you. So let's try to figure out what's blocking us and get back to being connected again. And that's the gist of the relational model. And when you fold in trauma, then you realize that a lot of times people are disappearing on you because they're having trauma reactions where they assume that you're going to be the abusive or neglectful parent that they grew up with. And the last thing about trauma is that it makes you no longer aware of yourself and aware of the other person. And you're just playing that role of being the frightened child or whatever that is. And so asking people to wonder about what's happening in you, in them, and between the two of you is the opposite of being in that fear-based survival role play state. And it's really it's like two people are in this reenactment, and then you say, hey, what's going on down here? And then you say, come up here, look at this, what's going on? And then you're both looking at it, and then you suddenly look up and look at each other, and you're in your authentic vulnerability. And then this is when true connection and presence really happens. And this becomes sacred whenever all of these things start to align. Okay, so that's what I've been learning. And then some of you sound like you read Stephanie's book. And so that's what she got. And in the book, she talks about Google Docs therapy, and people call me and they're like, hey, I want some of that Google Docs therapy. I'm like, that's not a thing. That's just a thing that she did. But it's a thing that we'll do live, but we don't need a transcript for that. But it's really cool because people turn on the chat or the captions function on Zoom. And so they get a live transcript going on the side. And sometimes we will do live transcript therapy, reflecting on what's going on between us. The other thing, there are a few things that would happen with her. One, in the book, she says that I called her stupid, and people are appalled. And like, there's some Amazon review talking about how atrocious it is that I called her stupid. But if you've read the book, then I hope you can feel the difference between calling someone stupid in a sincere way versus in an affectionate, endeared way. Please, Julie, are you nodding because you remember that part of the book? And it was endeared, right? It wasn't that I really was trying to denigrate her. Yes. She and I tried to debrief about what that was. And it's like we're both tiger children. We both are perfectionistic. And in that moment, I was both honoring our tiger parenting survival ancestry while forgiving her for her imperfections. I was calling her stupid, but I was appropriating the word stupid as an expression of love. And she knew it too. She goes, am I doing that thing again? I go, yeah, you are. And she was able to be vulnerable, imperfect, have made a mistake, but experience that mistake in the context of love. And that's the goal. I think that's what we all need. It's really cheesy. I was about to say love heals all, but it's not that. There's a lot of technique in how to love someone well. So don't just think that it takes like 20 years of real training to become good at using love in a therapeutic way without it becoming out of control and stuff.
Dr. Hum, we have about 15 more minutes. Do you think this is a good time to stop for questions? And also, like, I don't think Stephanie hates you because she posted on her Instagram that you that you are coming to speak. So I think she totally adores you.
It would be. It's a great time to stop. And I do want to start to collectively start to summarize what we can take from this rambling talk. I can do that I can do that with you, but it'd be wonderful if we did it together.
I am noticing some questions in the chat as well as in the Q&A. If maybe I can also pose those questions. Would that be all right? Awesome. So you spoke, I'm just seeing in the chat, there's a lot of like people resonating with different parts of your talk, and also just sharing some affirmations for you that the talk has been so affirming and also has been really healing for people. So thank you so much for being here. So some of the questions, there's a few questions, but I think I'll start with this one. So Tim asks, are there new methods of quote unquote decolonized counseling or therapy that are being explored? And they're asking because many AAPI friends are getting their degrees in mental health field primarily taught from Western methodology. And along with that, someone also asked, what methods do you think would work for AAPI populations other than CBT that might be more culturally responsive?
So one thing that's happening to me as I'm getting older is that I can't stand ideas and labels. And I'm becoming more and more simple. So the idea of methods and styles or approaches doesn't fit for me. I have a natural repulsion to that idea. There's some core truths among all the methods, and the proliferation of methods is actually a byproduct of commercialization and also this need to become evidence-based so that you can be like legitimized in some way. But there's more common ground than difference. And the true research on psychotherapy shows that they all work. They're all good. And like this, I would encourage you to just stay honest and truthful and learn, and to be humble. Like, don't think you know. Like, you need to learn to be broken down. Like, I learned when I was learning CBT, I became a CBT therapist. When I was doing psychodynamic, I became a psychodynamic psychotherapist. So you learn all the skills, like you learn, and then you, after that training, it becomes muscle memory for you, and then you become more of your own person in the room. That's the goal. But you have to still go through the process. It's like when who's that guy? The artist. Oh my God, I'm so old. I see his face, Picasso. You see how simple his drawings are? Oh wow, I have to make sure my wife doesn't overhear this. I'm about to liken myself to Picasso because I believe in simplicity in the drawing. But if you look at his training, he has the most incredible, rigorous training. He can render, he knows color theory, his drafting skills are incredible, but then his art is purely from his soul. And so don't worry about finding the right method. Pursue the method that resonates with where you are in your life and what you need to do to heal, and what you think you can, what adds to your toolkit of healing powers, abilities, and then keep knowing that that's not going to be the answer. Don't ever land on a false idol of who's right. Keep growing, keep becoming, allow yourself to make mistakes and let it hurt enough so that you grow into the next thing you need to grow into. That's a better answer than giving you a clear answer. But if I did give you a clear answer, it would be parts work of some kind, somatic work of some kind, but you still better know the theory behind cognitive behavioral therapy, and you have to understand attachment theory. I still think that the relational approach is super important, but no one can get it anywhere outside of New York, a few analytic institutes. trauma. You have to understand trauma. And then learn other things. If you look at who's doing psychedelics, who's doing Reiki, who's doing all the other weird stuff, it's mostly therapists. We're trying to figure out what else works because we've seen the limits of what we have to offer. One of my most powerful healing experiences was doing soul retrieval from a Native American perspective, with an indigenous healer who was just doing drumming. It was and we did profound work that I could make sense of psychodynamically, but it was more powerful than 5 years of psychodynamic psychotherapy.
Thank you so much. Seeing so much love in the chat for you and the answer. And I'm going to attempt to summarize it here in a moment, but also moving on to another question that I'm seeing. So how do clinicians approach generational differences, such as when it comes to career, major choice in a decolonizing way, when the person's goals don't align with their families or their parents?
It's a weird answer. It's so much of life has to do with learning how important the process of grief is. I know that answer doesn't make any sense. As soon as I heard that question, I heard the grief in the question, in the loss of coherence between ancestry, the oppressive, the fear-based, the fear in a parent's mind, the worry for their child, the worry, is my child gonna be happy? Is my child gonna have enough to eat? Because mental health profession does not make that much money. And then I also heard the grief of not having the parent support and see and believe in the person who's trying to find their own true self. So it's almost like I'm also allergic to how questions, and I think that question was posed as an how question. And the answer is that you have to feel what's behind that how question and grieve what processes are unfolding and that are behind there. Like, this is very important for someone here. Like, once you start asking how questions, you're actually in survival brain. And you have to get into the presence of what is behind that urge to solve this thing. And then you speak from that place of grief and longing, and you're actually more powerful. So what that would mean is that if I were literally talking to that person, I would get them to feel the loss of not having their parents support them, or the anger or frustration or whatever that is emotionally. I'd have it fill their body. And then from there, speak words that give truth to that, but in a way that captures all of it, not just the anger, not the resentment. It would be the longing as well. And that's the best shot you have at getting your parents to see you as a person who's just trying to find their own way. But it's not because it's seeing you as the person who's trying to find their own way. It's the person who's experiencing longing, rage, resentment, and all that stuff. And then they can also then hopefully be invited to express their worries, their concerns, their disappointments, or whatever it is that they're experiencing. And then you're in this moment of like true revelation that becomes another sacred thing of like two souls seeing each other. Sorry, it's really weird. Maybe you'll get it when you're like this old. Cindy.
Thank you so much. Incredibly powerful answer. And seeing in the chat someone saying, one of my favorite clinical supervisors once said the best therapy is common sense. I'm of the same quote old generation is Jacob, and these days it's really more about principles. How do we do things differently if it hasn't been working, no matter what tools you're using to make it happen? So a lot of resonance there. One final question I'm seeing, oh, actually, I'm seeing the second one. Oh, so related to your how question, relatedly, what is your favorite answer for people who ask how to practice decolonizing in general or in a therapy context? I think you were also sort of speaking to this as well. Do you have thoughts on somatic therapies? And this one's specifically for trauma, but you were sort of speaking to before of like the feeling in the body when it comes to those how questions.
I didn't fully hear the question. What's my response to how questions? Is that kind of right? So my favorite Zen master when I was in college was a guy named Rinzai, or Lin Chi in the Chinese. And he used to carry something called a shit stick. Literally, it's called a shit stick. So I'm not swearing out of, this is an academic term. This is a piece of corn stuck to a piece of stick. And you're supposed to, clean yourself with it after because there's no paper towels or toilet paper back in, I forget what century he was in. And Rinzai, whenever someone would ask him a question like, what is Buddha nature? What is the meaning of life? And all this other stuff, he would just hit them really hard with the shit stick. And I feel like that's my energetic response to any how question. I kind of want to just hit you really hard until you feel something again. And so that segues to the somatic question, which is that instead of the how question, which is from here and it's a disconnection from the heart, sink into the heart. And then you have to have an outpouring of grief, sorrow, and in that outpouring, you reclaim love and compassion for self and other at the same time. It feels like that's what I'm doing all the time in all my work. It's the core running theme throughout everything I'm doing. And it's what I'm learning from other healing practices, from psychedelics, and it's the somatic work as well. It's like reconnecting, because trauma makes you disconnected, dissociated, compartmentalized. And so does a lot of tiger parenting and all that other stuff. And so the goal is that once you reconnect with your heart and your body, the first thing is that you have to purge all kinds of bad stuff that's been blocked for a long time. And we're all afraid of that. And that's avoidance. And avoidance is the hallmark of anxiety disorders. So if you work with anxiety disorders, then you're going to meet avoidance. And so then you're going to end up in the same place of needing to teach people how to just tolerate their sensations, their overwhelming sensations. And then once they're there and you do this purging thing, then after you learn to purge for hours, and you do it with people who love you or who will bear witness to this, then you're back into this incredibly powerful, joyful, whole state. That's the goal. So if you're asking a how question, sink into your body, invite the difficult emotions to come in. And also the last thing is that then go to this befuddled place of utter complexity at how dumbfoundedly complex the world is, and grieve it. And just keep having compassion for how complex life is.
Amazing, thank you so much. I'm wondering, do we have time for maybe one more question? Lynn, what do you think?
I think Lewis has a question, but I think if they go to the panel on conditions, they could explore that a little bit more. Maybe we want to wrap up. And Jacob, is there any last insights that you could give us, or anything that you want us? One thing you definitely want us to take away from your keynote. Yeah. Sorry, I should have asked you that.
No, it's okay. This is so cheesy. It's so weird.
Cheesy is
Woo, this is so weird. I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of what's happening. I feel my heart is full right now. And instead of words, it's more like I hope that I want you to know how full my heart is, but I want you to know because I want your heart to be filled, I think. And I hope that in some way you were, see, this is so cheesy and wrong. I hope that you were moved in some way by today. And however, I was trying to reach your heart, not your head, to wake you up and to be excited about what's to come and to be uncertain about it and embrace that uncertainty. And to know that like you're gonna end up in an unexpected place and welcome that. Don't get tight. Surrender to the process of growth and healing and meeting and knowing, I guess. Yeah, it's exciting. Can't wait to see what you guys do.
You want to give us a virtual hug and then sign?
Yes, exactly. That's what I want.
My
Ah.
head is tingly. Thank you. If I dare summarize this talk, it would be love and presence.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know I'm a part of the steering committee, but I think we did an awesome job inviting you, and I am so glad I talked before you and not after. We hope that we can continue this dialogue and relationship with you and others in this room. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy your day.
Do we need a little breather after that? I feel like I do. I know we have to like, we don't have